Hello, welcome to Mr. Paul's Pantry. I'm Mr. Paul, and if you're new here, a very warm welcome. If you're a returning visitor, it's nice to see you back again. Thanks for calling round. Now today, I've had a few requests, by the way, for today's recipe, and it's for a Gala pie. I've made pork pies before, I've shown you how to make them, but this is a Gala pie, and it's got hard-boiled egg through the middle of it. Now, it used to be known, when I was first learning the trade, it used to be known as a veal and ham pie. But unfortunately, as you know, veal fell out of favour a few years ago with many people, and for good reason. So the butchers who used to make them, or the caterers who used to make them, and bakers who used to make them, had to think of something different. And they didn't know what to do. But the Grosvenor Hotel in London decided they used a lot of them for banquets and galas and things like that. So they made one with pork pie filling and the egg, exactly the same, but using pork instead of veal. And they called it a Grosvenor pie. And today it's still called a Grosvenor pie in many parts of the UK. In my family business, we used to make them and we called them Gala pies. I think for the simple reason we didn't want to step on anybody's toes calling it a Grosvenor pie when it was their sort of idea. So we called it a Gala pie, as did many other pork butchers who made pies in those days. And I've made them ever since in my bakeries. So today I'm going to show you exactly how to make one. It's not something you make every week for Sunday tea. It's something you will make for a special occasion, something you make a nice table centerpiece for a buffet, weddings, parties, things like that. And it's well worth the effort, I can assure you. Okay, let's do it. So, we're going to make this Gala pie. Now, as I explained before, Gala pie is really a very large pork pie. It's got the same pastry, hot crust or hot water crust pastry, and it's got a pork pie filling, except it's got hard-boiled eggs running right through the middle of it. So each slice has a piece of egg in it. You've seen the bits in the shops like that before. So in the bakery, we used to use this tin tins like this to make the Gala pie. It's quite a large tin, so I'm not going to use that today. I'm going to substitute that for my trusty old £2 loaf tin. I get into trouble calling it a £2 loaf tin. Today it's known as a 900-gram loaf tin. Okay, it's not quite the correct shape. It's a little bit larger than that when you cut a slice off, if you can see, but that's all I've got, so I'm going to show you how to make it in that. Now, it's got the same pastry as a pork pie, it's got the same filling as a pork pie, except it's got the egg through. Originally, this pie used to be called a veal and ham pie, and as many of you know, veal went really out of favour a few years ago, and so it was changed to using a pork pie filling. So today we're going to use bread flour, not plain flour or all-purpose. Bread flour is best, it gives you best finish. We're going to use lard, which there's no substitute for. And please don't do like you see these fancy chefs on television, Gordon Ramsay and Paul Hollywood and all those people, all adding all sorts of things to the pastry. They put butter and all sorts of things in. We don't do that, okay? A traditional method is lard only. I've got some water and some salt. So the ingredients, they're all listed underneath, but it's 500 grams of flour, 200 grams of lard, 184 grams of cold water and 6 grams of salt. Okay, that's all we need. But unlike ordinary pastry, this is called a hot crust pastry. So instead of trying to keep the pastry as cool as we can when we're making it, this is going to be actually boiled. We're going to boil the flour, the salt and the lard. We're going to boil the water, the lard and the salt all together in a pan, and then add it to the dry flour. So I'll show you how to do it. Let's get on with it now. Right, now the first thing we're going to do is to put the lard into the pan. And the salt into the pan, followed by the cold water. We light the gas and bring that up to a boil, and we heat that up until all the lard has dissolved completely. The water will be boiling, the lard will be all dissolved. It must be boiling. Whatever anybody else tells you on the internet or on television, to get a proper crisp pork pie pastry, it must be boiling. And unlike a lot of people who show you how to make pork pies on television, you do not add any butter or anything else to that. It is cold water, lard, which you can't substitute, and salt. We'll just let that boil away and I'll be back shortly. Okay, as you can see now, the water's boiling, the lard is all dissolved, and we're ready to go. And the water, the boiling water and the lard is going straight into the flour. Sorry, I'm trying to do that left-handed and I can't. There we are. And we'll turn the mixer on. Slow speed, so we don't get flour everywhere. And we leave that to mix for 3 to 4 minutes, because we want to develop some of the gluten that's in that strong bread flour. That's what gives the pork pie crust its structure. And if you do it as I'm showing you, you'll have a lovely crispy crust on the outside and a nice soft creamy pastry on the inside. Okay, there we are. I think that's ready now. And it's still very, very hot, so we need to be careful. I'll just show you the consistency of it. Can you see that? That needs to be left to cool now for a few hours. You cannot use that pastry while it's hot like that. So, while we're waiting for the pastry to cool, because we can't use it while it's hot as I've explained, here are the ingredients for the filling. Now it's exactly the same as, almost exactly the same as the pork pie filling, with the difference being the pork that I'm going to use here is minced rather than chopped. If you look at my other video making the pork pie, I chop the pork, keep it nice and coarse. This one I've minced it, and the reason it's minced is because it needs to pack nice and tightly around the eggs inside to hold it all together. Otherwise you'll have lots of gaps, and as soon as you try to cut a slice, it'll all fall apart. Okay, so the pork, we're going to use the same belly pork as I always use for pork pies. It's a good combination of fat and lean. You need to be looking for about a 70% lean and 30% fat. And I know it's difficult for somebody who just is a home cook to gauge that. But if you use belly pork, which has got nice layers of fat and lean, take the skin off of course, and then it's usually about right. So I've got 1 kilo of belly pork here, minced. You can see that nicely. It's very nicely coarsely minced. I've got 100 grams of breadcrumbs or rusk. In the bakery we always use rusk, but you can use breadcrumbs, but they need to be dry breadcrumbs, not fresh. Okay, and no need to use things like panko or anything like that. Just get some stale bread of your own, pop it in the oven for a couple of hours on a very, very low light, and just crumb it up. That's in there for one reason only. It's not to make the meat go any further, it's not to make the filling cheaper. What it does, it absorbs the fat that's in this meat. Now normally when you cook the meat, the fat will start to render out, as when you roast a joint on Sunday. it runs into the bottom of the tin. Nice to put your potatoes around. We don't want that here. We need to keep the moisture inside the filling of the pie. So what this does, when the fat starts rendering out, instead of it running to the bottom, into the bottom of the pastry, it's absorbed by the breadcrumb or the rusk in the pie, and then when we come to eat it, the moisture is all still in there. It's nice and moist and very, very tasty. Okay, so that's why that's in there. And we've got some seasoning. Now I've put the recipe, a link to the recipe for the seasoning underneath. This is my family recipe that's been used by my family for more than 100 years. If you don't want to be bothered making the seasoning, you can go to my website, click on the shop, and you can buy some ready-made by post from me. Okay. Now we also need for this pie some eggs. However many eggs you need depends on how big a tin you're going to make it in. But a nice little way of deciding how many eggs you're going to need is, first of all, place your eggs in the tin side by side like that across the tin. I hope you can see that okay. Can you? Yes. And then add one more egg, because you're going to cut the ends off those so they're nicely tucked together. So that's in my tin. I've got 3 eggs there, and 1 extra is going to be 4 eggs, which I will hard boil ready for the finished pie. All right, so that's a little tip for you. Just pop them in the tin you're going to use. So we've got 1 kilo of pork, belly pork. We've got 100 grams of rusk or breadcrumb. We've got 36 grams of seasoning, and however many eggs your tin is going to take. This is going to take 4 eggs. And remember what I said before about making a pie like this, pork pies and all sorts of things. It's usual to gauge equal quantities of pastry and filling. So I think when we made the pastry, I think if I remember rightly, it was about just over 800 grams, probably nearly 900 grams, right? So not far off a kilo. So by the time we've made this filling, we might have a little bit of meat left over because the eggs will take up some of the room. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so let's get on with making the filling. So, first of all, we're going to put the pork into the bowl, and we're going to follow that with the rusk and the seasoning. And give it a good mix. Now we're mixing it well, we're not squashing it all together like a sausage meat if we can help it. We're just mixing it together through our fingers so that all that minced pork gets coated with the seasoning and the rusk. And when we've done this, give it a nice good mix. Make sure there's no loose breadcrumb or rusk in the bottom of the basin or dish. Now, can you see that? It's all nicely coated. I haven't squashed it up at all. I'm trying to keep it so that every piece is coated. That's the best way of making sure it's evenly distributed. We will start and mix it a little bit more before we add it into the pie. Now that's going to be left now in the fridge for about an hour so that the seasoning can permeate the pork. Okay, it's going to be left in there and we'll come back shortly. Okay, so here's the pastry, which has been cooling down well. We're going to sort of take about a third of that for the lid. And then the rest of it, we're going to roll out and line our tin with it. Keep the pastry on the move, as with any ordinary pastry. That way it doesn't stick to the board. Now with hot crust pastry, it's very, very important we don't add any more flour here, or on the rolling pin. Okay, it's very important, because what happens is when we're putting it in the tin, if any happens to fold over when we're putting it in the tin, it won't bind together where the flour is. It'll form a crack in the pastry, and then when you come to put your jelly in afterwards, it'll all leak out. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll this out to about 1/4 of an inch. We can. And it needs to be, to start with, at least as long as the pastry and almost up the sides. It needs to be a little bit more than that. Because what we're going to do, that should do it, what we're going to do here is we're going to cut this like that and like that. And use this for the base, going in here like this, into the base, and push it into the corners with this part of your finger. Careful not to make any holes in it. Now you can see, if I just show you now just quickly in there, we've got the bottom covered and the ends almost, but we will be able to mould this, because as I explained to you before, it's like modelling clay, it's like plasticine, and that's why it needs to be like this, because we need to now mould this to the shape. Now we've got a piece to fill in here, which is going to go like that. And remember, we need no flour anywhere in this, otherwise where we're joining this pastry here, it won't stick. And a little piece up this, I'll just roll that a little bit more, a little piece up this side. There we are. Now you can see it hasn't gone quite to the top here, you see that? But it doesn't matter, because we're going to mould this now with our fingers and pull it up the sides of the tin. We're thinning the pastry slightly, push it right into the corners so we don't get thick corners. We don't want that. So that's just about finished. You can see inside it now, it's pretty well the same thickness all over. And we're going to now start and put some meat in the case. Before we do that, we need to make sure the meat is squashing together like this, not like it was before. I'll just show you. It was like this before. Now it's like this, because we need to squash that in the bottom. Move that so that we can fill the gaps. So first of all, I'm going to fill the corners. Like that. Then I'm going to fill the bottom up to the sides. And remember, don't put too much in at this stage, just make sure it's all pressed together, because we don't want a lot of air bubbles in it. Otherwise, round the egg especially, when we have air bubbles when it's cooked, the whole thing could collapse and fall apart. So we're just putting a little bit in the bottom now to make a bed for the... There we are. That's the little bed we've made for the eggs, if you can see that. Now the eggs are going to go in next, and as I explained to you before, we're going to just take off a little piece at each side, at each end should I say, like that. That's so that when we put them in, they will fit neatly up to the side of the pie and neatly next to each other as we put the eggs in. So we're going to do that and there, that and there. So I did say to you before it was going to take roughly 4 eggs. Well, it's just a little bit short, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a portion of that egg and stick it just down that end, just to make it. So if you can see that inside there now, what we need to do next is to gently pack the meat in small portions. Don't try and do it all at once, down each side of the egg line. Once we get it some down each side, we can start to pack it down without squashing the eggs out of place. Into there. I will show you inside in a moment. I've tried getting the camera to look down here in the top of it, and it's taken me 1 hour and I've given up. Now there we're putting down each side there, you see. And what we're going to do now is just press it down neatly, so keeping the eggs in the middle. And we can start and fill that right up now, each side. Don't leave the meat loose like this though, because it won't work. It needs packing down as we go. That's why these sort of pies are usually expensive, because machines aren't usually capable of making these kind of pies. They've got the hang of making pork pies and sausage rolls and things by machine, but these sort of things are usually handmade, and really they're for celebrations. That's why it's called a Gala Pie. They're for celebrations, parties, buffets, and of course all handmade like this. So we're going to carry on topping this meat up like this until we get right to the top. Now I did say to you earlier in the video that usually the pastry and the filling are about, give or take, equal quantities. And we started with about just short of 1 kilo of pastry. We've still got some left for the lid, of course, remember, from that kilo. And we started with 1 kilo of pork. Well, there's the eggs gone in there, don't forget, so a little bit of pork left. There it is, you can see the little bit left. So it wasn't a bad estimate as to how much would go in. I shall make something nice with that for my supper. So here we are. Now that's nicely packed in, all the air out of it, can you see? I think you can all see that nicely. It's beautiful pie, lovely and packed with pork, and it's heavy, that's the main thing. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the lid. So we're going to make the lid. This is the bit of pastry we have left, and please note again, we've used no flour in any part of this rolling of the pastry. So we need to get the pastry to roughly the same size as the top of the pie. So what I'm doing first of all, I'm trying to get it into, let me just show you, I'm trying to get it into, to start with, roughly the width of the pie. Once we've done that, you can start and roll it the rest of the way then. Always roll away from you or towards you. Don't try doing that, it's very awkward. When you've been baking a few years, you can do that just to stretch it out a little bit, but it's best if you just roll it one way, either away from you or towards you from the middle. Keep it on the move. A bit of meat stuck on there, never mind. It's all going in the pie. So there we are. It's getting to the correct shape. And let me see if we're anywhere near there. Now that's perfect. Perfect for the pie. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take some cold water and just wet all round this pastry that's sticking at the top. There we are, all round. And all. Now this goes on top, and we need to just gently squash that to the pastry that's sticking up from the sides of the tin. Not a lot at this stage, just gently. You see that? And then we need to push down and out to get a nice seal. Push down and out towards your other finger, so you're getting the two pieces nicely squashed together. That's where the seal is. We will crimp it next, but you need to do this first, because crimping it alone with a very heavy pie like this doesn't always work correctly. So there we are. And I'm going to trim that now like this. Trim off the excess, because we don't want a great big thick crust around the top. And that's the little bit of pastry we've got left over from what we started with, which was 850 grams or something like that, I think. Okay, so that's not bad. Now we're going to do the crimping of it. We're going to use the thumb of this hand and the finger and thumb of this hand, and we're going to push them in like that. Together. Gently. Don't try and rush it, there's no hurry, because we're going to have to leave this now for a couple of hours in the fridge before we bake it. There we are. And the last but not least, I'm just going to wet this is a piping funnel I'm using. You can use a potato peel or anything like that, and I'm just going to make 3 little holes in the top like this, because when we've cooked it, I want the pastry to have a hole there so I can pour in the gravy. Now, if you want to be very, very fancy, you can take a little bit of your pastry that you've left over, pry that off. That's got a bit of meat stuck in it, never mind. We'll take this, roll it round thinly, obviously thinner than we've. My table's a little bit damp now with the watering, like this. And then we're going to cut 1, 2, or 3 leaves like this. Take those off. There's 1. There's 2. And there's the 3rd one. And we're just going to make a little design on there with the knife. Like that. The last one. There's 3 little leaves that we're going to put on top. You don't have to do this. It's just if you've got a bit of pastry left, it just makes a nice little. And we're going to roll that like this, sorry, roll that like this, and then roll it up. Cut it off flat, bring your pie over, and with a little drop of water, put that there, and the little leaves go 1, 2, 3 like that. That's nicely decorated. So when we egg wash that now, I can't do it just now because it has to sit in the fridge for about an hour or 2 hours. In the shop, in the bakery, we used to leave things, pork pie type, all overnight, so this pastry had settled down and didn't shrink too much in the oven. So this has been sitting in the fridge for a couple of hours now. It's nice and cool. I'm going to egg wash the top generously. Please note I've lifted the decoration off until I do this because we wanted to put that decoration on without egg washing it. Now this is going to go into the oven for about 1 hour 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes. 1 hour and 15 or 20 minutes at about 170. Might take a little bit longer, but I don't think so. So we'll pop the little flower there. We'll pop one of the leaves there. One of the leaves there. And the other leaf behind there. There we are. I'll pop that in the oven now and I'll report back when it's ready. Okay, so here we are straight out of the oven. It's very, very hot. You can see that. Now, this has got a little bit over brown for my liking, but what's happened is, and I have mentioned this before in some videos, if you have a fan oven, you will already know that they run a little bit hotter, about 20 degrees hotter than the normal setting on the oven. For instance, if you set it to 100 degrees in your oven, the fan oven will run at about 120 degrees. Unfortunately, I accidentally, when I put this in the oven, I did it correctly. I didn't have the fan going, but at 170, I had a look at it about 3/4 of the way through cooking. By the way, it was in 1 hour and 15 minutes, this 1 hour 15 minutes. But when I looked halfway through, checked it, put it back in, and unfortunately, I put the fan on accidentally. So the second half of the cooking was a little bit hotter than it should have been. Hence, it's got a little bit brown on this decoration here, as you can see. But not to worry, it won't have affected the taste. I've tested the internal temperature. It needs to be over 75. I don't care what anybody else tells you. They'll tell you it needs to be 69 or 72. It needs to be over 75 degrees internal temperature if you've got a thermometer. Okay, but that was 1 hour 15 minutes, like I've just told you. If I hadn't put the fan on, it might have had to take 1 hour 20 minutes. All right, but with it being a little bit hotter for the second half cooking. Well, the pie's been cooling now for about an hour and 20 minutes, something like that, just over the hour. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add the gel. The 3 holes in the top. If we pour it into one of the holes and see it appear in all 3 and let it gently settle, once it's full, then we know we've finished. We leave it then to set until you want to use it. I pop it in the fridge and it'll take about another hour to set the gel and everything. Okay? So there we have the finished product, the traditional English Gala Pie. Hope you enjoy it. Well, that's all I have time for today. If you've enjoyed the video, go underneath, give it a thumbs up. If you've any comments, do leave them there, please. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd like to hear those as well. Leave them in the comments down below. So this is Mr. Paul saying bye for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.